This episode of Muddy River Gems is brought to you by Dot Foods.
I think what it comes down to is the culture and the people.
Our culture here at Dot is like no other. I've never experienced anything like what I've lived with for the last 12 years.
Dot is very diverse.
It is truly a family-owned business, but it is a family inside and out.
You always feel like you matter and you play a big hand in the pot.
There's so many opportunities to make a difference at Dot and really contribute to the success of the organization.
Are you ready for a story 150 years in the making? On this edition of Muddy River Gems, brought to you by Dot Foods, join us for a tour of the Hospital Sisters of St. Francis Museum. Brian Blasco, this museum has been here for several years, but one of the new things is that now people that can't come to this museum can view it online.
Yeah, it was created in 2011 and it has served us well, and now we realize there's a global audience. So we created this whole experience now virtually through our website, which is exciting because visitors now can look at it from their home instead of having to come to Springfield.
Mm-hmm. And if they want to, they're certainly welcome to.
It is, yes.
It's free to the public, and it's really interesting. 150 years of Hospital Sisters of St. Francis and what they've done in that 150 years. And as you look around, it's obviously a very impressive space and a very, very well done museum.
Yes.
I bet you're thrilled.
Very thrilled. We worked with a company in St. Louis, many years ago to create this experience and make it helpful to a visitor to understand the hospital sisters, what their charism is, what their gift is, what their impact they've had on healthcare in the United States and the world, and our own call to do something in our own life, not like the sisters did, but in our everyday life to make a difference.
Many people in Central Illinois are familiar with the Hospital Sisters because they have, I think, 11 hospitals. Most of them are in Central Illinois, and they have hospitals in Wisconsin as well.
That's right.
And the one that, the biggest one, of course, would be St. John's in Springfield, the first one, and the one that most people in our viewing audience would be familiar with.
Yeah, it is considered the flagship hospital because it was the mother house. It was the headquarters at the time of its founding where the sisters lived and had their ministry. So it's an important piece of our history.
Yeah, I mentioned the 150th anniversary. That's being celebrated this year, and you arranged to have some of the nuns who have been in the order for some time to help us out. So here's a little history lesson.
Yes.
Sister Maureen, you went to the School of Nursing.
I
right?
did.
And this is quite a feat. It was the first Catholic nursing school in the country.
It is, and it still exists, so we're very proud of that fact.
Yeah. And interestingly, not only did you become a nurse, you also became a nun after you became
I did.
a nurse.
I graduated from the School of Nursing, and then the next month I came out to begin my training as a hospital sister.
So the history of the School of Nursing is very much entwined with the history of the Hospital Sisters here.
Oh, absolutely, yes. The school was started in 1886 when the sisters had only been here 11 years. And the first textbooks were actually written in German because that was what the sisters spoke. Then this particular book, which is called The Nursing Sister, was written in 1899 because they realized they needed to change to English. And originally the school only had was just for the sisters for about, I think, maybe 20 years. Then they opened it for women, and I think it was in the late 1950s that men were allowed to be students, graduate. And about the mid to late 60s, they allowed the women to be married. Prior to that, all of them had to remain single. So
when did the School of Nursing become the College of Nursing?
it was in the 1980s.
Oh, very recent.
So it's very recent, yes.
Okay.
And it's a little bit of an unusual program in that it's just the final 2 years of college. So the students come in as with already like an associate's degree, and they only study nursing at now St. John's College of Nursing. And they also have a program for people who are nurses or have some background as what they call like the bachelor's completion program. So
Now, back in the 19th century, was the school attached to St. John's Hospital?
it was part of St. John's
It was,
Hospital,
okay.
yes.
Now, this is an interesting book, have you?
Yes.
This is from 1899.
Yes.
This is the English version of the guidebook, the
Yes,
nurse's
this
guidebook,
was their
the textbook.
This was the textbook.
Why don't you give us a little flavor from that? You
Okay.
have some places marked in there that
I
we
do,
can...
that I think are kind of interesting.
Yeah.
The format of the book is that it's questions and answers. So this one is talking about the patient's room. And it says, how should the room be kept? Bright and cheerful, unless the condition of the patient requires it darkened. Then it goes on, should the sunlight be left in or not? Let the sunlight in freely, always shading the patient's face. What should the sister do if the bed faces the window? She should turn it around, or better, set up a screen. So, and then it goes on with different things about how you might move the bed.
It's so practical.
Well, and of course, you know, German people like a lot of order. So that the way, you know, it would be neat and bright. That would be very important. And then another interesting one is about feeding. How you would, it's actually called the proper manner of serving meals.
Okay.
How should the meals be served to the patient? Serve them upon a tray or a bed tray, which is covered with a clean napkin. Have cups and spoons shining and clean. This is the best. Be careful not to slop the tea into the saucer or bring too much of anything. So, I mean, you know, this is pretty clear. What should the sister be especially careful about? That all necessary things are on the tray when it is brought to the patient. If she is obliged to go for something forgotten, she should never set the waiter on the bed, but on the table. And then we'll close with my favorite.
Okay.
What should the sister never do in the presence of the patient? Never taste the food. So, you know, also very practical for
Very
someone
practical.
I
love that. Don't bring too much.
Yeah, don't bring too much.
You got to be frugal too.
Well, be frugal. Don't overfeed.
Yeah.
You know, the patients are sick, so that's.
It's very interesting. You know, the hospital sisters were real pioneers in healthcare.
Yes.
And they had to figure a lot of this stuff out themselves because they didn't have any training. They had to just figure it out, didn't they?
And the first sisters who came were also very young. Most of them were in their 20s and 30s. And you know, today we think people have to be a little older than that, and maybe more experienced, and they came over and started all these hospitals. So, you know, they were strong women.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And adventurous.
Yes.
To just take off from Eastern Germany and just to not have no idea where you're going and just take it on.
And expect that they would never return to Germany. They would never see the sisters in Germany or their families again. That took a lot of courage. I think they're much stronger women than I am.
And this would have still been sort of like pioneer life.
Yes. Oh, and they were surprised when they got here that the German immigrants that they were to care for spoke English, because they expected they were going to be able to speak, and they couldn't speak to them.
Yeah.
So they had to learn the language.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you, sister.
Thank you.
Brian, this is not just any old desk, is it?
No. Yeah. It's a wonderful piece of furniture. It's an antique. When you look at the wood and the varnish, it was created in the early 1900s in St. Louis for the sole purpose of the sisters running their hospitals. So this was at St. John's Hospital, and the request was made for drawers, 6 on this side, 6 on this side, for each hospital. So here's the drawer for St. John's, and then here is the drawer for Belleville, and so on. And the folklore is they put the day's work for the hospital in the drawer, emptied it at the end of the day to start the next morning with an empty drawer, and it was functional.
So Mother Superior, okay, here's the inbox for St. John's. Okay, everything in here's got to be cleared out. It's got to be finished by day's end. Huh?
That is correct. And now we have smaller desks and computers.
Wow. And this one is for St. Francis Hospital in Litchfield.
Yes.
This is amazing. St. Anthony's in Effingham.
Yes.
Oh, St. Anthony's too, interestingly. Big fire at St. Anthony's.
Yes.
And I guess that really, somebody told me that was largely responsible for a lot of the safety systems that went into effect for large buildings of all kinds.
Before 1949 and that fire, there was no safety for buildings, for fire safety, fire codes, egress, doors. So our fire, which was a tragedy, put that all into place so that hopefully that would never happen again.
In addition to being important for these 12 hospitals, the first nursing school, a Catholic nursing school, was started here in Springfield at St. John's, wasn't it?
That's correct. Yeah, the sisters decided there was a need to educate their future nurses.
Sister Ann, we have a really precious book in your hands. It's a diary written by one of the original hospital sisters who came over from Germany.
Right.
Before we read excerpts out of that, though, you got to give us a little history on this, because these 20 nuns that came over faced one heck of an adventure at a very difficult time, didn't they?
Yes, they did. Yes, they did.
Tell me what was going on in Germany at the time.
Well, in 1875, there was religious persecution raging in Prussia. And the sisters, the hospital sisters of the Third Order Regular of St. Francis, felt that they might be abolished as other religious communities were abolished in Germany. And it was about that time that Bishop Peter Baltus from the Diocese of Alton, Illinois, contacted Mother General and asked if she would send sisters to America to help him in his diocese. And of course, Mother General was more than ready to accept that offer, realizing the persecution that was going on. Many sisters volunteered. 20 were accepted to go. And among them was Sister Crispina Topp, who was only 25 years old and only in the community for 3 years. And she began a diary of the travels across the ocean.
So she and 19 other young nuns made the leap, decided to go ahead and take the offer to come over and care for people.
Right.
They didn't have a hospital yet. They were just going to come over and care for people.
That's right.
But this diary is interesting because you have some entries that are really, read us some of it.
All right. So there are 10 days on the ship, and this is October 25th. And it says, she reports, "As the bell rang, we quickly arose and went for breakfast, which tasted good this morning. The weather was bad, and they feared it would be worse. At 11 o'clock, the wind howled terrible. The waves went up like mountains, and the ship seemed to be down in the valley. We expected to be dashed into the deep at any moment."
Wow. Good thing they were
Scary.
women of faith.
Yes. I can't imagine how I would have been
Yeah.
in a situation like that.
Well, and imagine how sick you'd feel too.
Yes.
Not just mentally, but physically ill after all
Well,
that rocking.
within a few days, many sisters were seasick, and they were probably seasick for most of the journey because there were only a few hours in any of those days that the wind wasn't howling and
What was hurricane season, wasn't it?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
The sisters thought it was a storm, and the captain told them it was a
Yeah.
hurricane.
What else do you have?
Okay, so now we'll go to October 27th. It was about 10 o'clock in the morning when the greatest danger of the storm had passed. Now we heard from the captain that it was not a storm, but a hurricane. We had never experienced anything like this before. During the night at 2 o'clock, when the waves covered the ship, the captain feared it might sink, and he turned the ship in the opposite direction and let it free to the wind and waves. The wind drove the ship 7 hours backwards toward Germany. During the day, they hoped from hour to hour to be able to turn the ship in the right direction, but this could not be accomplished till evening. During the night, the ship sailed quickly towards America.
Wow.
I imagine that was very discouraging when they felt like they were gone backwards 7 hours.
Absolutely.
They didn't want to have to go through all that again.
Captain was probably the only one that knew. Who would know what direction you're going in anyway?
Right.
You're just being
Right.
buffed around. Wow.
Right. And this ship had sails, So they let down the sails and just let the ship go where it would, because they couldn't control it. So now, this is November 3rd. We're getting closer to our destination. And Sister Crispina wrote, "It is 6:30 in the evening. They are letting down the anchors, but we must remain on the ship for the night because they fear thieves." We saw 4 sisters at the harbor. They had come to meet us.
So they had gotten to New York then. They're in New York Harbor.
Right. Well, not quite. On November 4th, we arose about 3 o'clock in the morning, and sometime later the ship sailed to the harbor. The sisters who had seen the night before came about 6 o'clock to meet us. The sisters are Franciscan Sisters of the Poor, who would daily travel to the harbor and assist travelers who had journeyed to America. Isn't that nice that they would do that, you know, to welcome them and make them feel that they were at home?
So our hospital sisters stayed with them for a brief period, I guess, before they took off to Illinois.
Well, no, they didn't.
No?
The sisters took them by streetcar to their convent and then let them get refreshed and had a nice meal in the early evening. And then at 6 o'clock that evening, they were on the train to go to Alton. I mean, there's...
You didn't get a rest.
No rest.
Okay, on the train to Alton, and probably when they got to Alton, I imagine the bishop put them right to work.
Well, not directly, but pretty soon. And he split the sisters up into 4s and 3s, and they went to six cities in his diocese: Springfield, Litchfield, Effingham, Belleville, East St. Louis, and Alton. And I'm sure that was hard too for the sisters, you know, to think that they were kind of together and that was nice, and then all of a sudden they're separated. And but they were troopers. They did what they needed to do.
Thank you, Sister.
You're welcome.
We'll be back with more on Muddy River Gems, brought to you by Dot Foods.
From our trucks to their lunch trays, to your local hospital, to your favorite pub, and to your kitchen table. For more than 60 years, Dot Foods and Dot Transportation have been stocking the shelves of your hometown. Sure, we've grown a lot, but at our core, we're still small-town, family-run businesses that care about our communities and the people who keep us running. Join the Dot family today and be part of something bigger.
Why work at Dot?
You could list out individual qualities forever.
There's a lot of opportunities. They take care of the employees, they take care of the community.
So our pay, our benefits, it's competitive. Time off, tons of flexibility.
They're willing to work with you to help you advance.
Well, Brian, we're looking at a picture of one of the original sisters, one of the original 20 that came to Illinois off the boat. And we heard about that boat trip. What a doozy that must have been. Yeah. And here she comes, and she gets immediately dispatched to Central Illinois, I guess. Where does she go?
Her first assignment is St. Anthony's in Effingham.
Okay.
And she's there for a few years, and then her next assignment is Springfield, to come to St. John's. And in addition to her other duties, she's on night duty per the request of the family of Mary Todd Lincoln. So from the hospital, she goes downtown Springfield to the Edwards home, Elizabeth Edwards, where Mrs. Lincoln is living.
Now this is after she moves back from Washington, after the assassination, she comes back from Washington.
That's correct. And there are a few years and needs care. And so the sisters provide care for her round the clock, and then she passes away in 1882.
What a saint. We're looking at a beautiful sculpture here. And this is noteworthy because the hospital sisters wanted to do something for the Lincoln Museum, didn't they?
Correct. So we had this commission made in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in 2006 as a gift to the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum, which depicts Sister Francis caring for Mrs. Lincoln. And the title of it is Healing Presence, meaning there's communication gaps, there's cultural gaps, there's religious gaps, but what can Sister do is be present. So her hand on Mrs. Lincoln's hand, giving her comfort.
Visitors to the Presidential Museum and Library would see this. This is a duplicate, right?
This is the copy.
Yeah. It's very powerful.
Yes.
Sister Anise, starting in, we've been talking about the history of the hospital sisters from 1875 on. And in those 150 years, it's remarkable how many places, how many locations the sisters have served. And we're looking at a display here in the museum, which all 72 locations, and most of them are hospitals or at least medical facilities, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you have several of them that you wanted to tell us about, and so I'm all ears.
Okay. Well, the first one I want to start with is our St. John's Hospital, because it is celebrating 150 years this year, 1975. The first thing I saw in our history book was that St. John's, the doors that never close. And of course, that's true for them and all of our hospitals, or any hospitals. Of course, that is what a hospital is there for. There's always help there, no matter what time you arrive. Okay, so the attitude in 1875, when our sisters arrived here from Germany, was that a hospital is someplace where you go to die. You know, that was the attitude, is that I don't want to go to a hospital because I'm going to die. And so little by little, the sisters were, with their care, starting here in Springfield, were able to change that attitude. However, they were also dealing with something at that time called nativism. And I'm afraid it's probably similar to what we are now experiencing as anti-immigrant. So if you were an immigrant, you know, German, you weren't welcome here because you weren't an American. And so and that's another attitude that they experienced when they arrived in.
Right, so the hospital sisters wanted to turn that around and make sure that everyone felt cared for.
Right. And so, well, no, they were experiencing
they were
because they were Germans.
I understand.
Didn't speak English. And so, but little by little, as they cared for people in here and as we spread out, they were able to dissipate that attitude because people could see, no, they're here to do good for us, to take care of us. And so that was a big help there. So when they arrived in Springfield, they lived with the Urson sisters because they had no place else to go. And also, the Ursons taught them English because they only spoke German. And so to care, you know, for the Americans. So that was a wonderful gift. Eventually, the bishop was able to buy a house on 7th Street in Springfield. And that is where that became the first Sisters Convent, but also the first hospital. And that was in 1875, the same year they got here. And so, you know, the sisters lived there, they cared for patients there, but most of the care at that time was done in the homes. It was, you know, people would go to people's homes and care for them, whatever it was that they needed. And of course, they did not charge for their care. There's a lovely picture of them in this farmer's wagon going around to different farmhouses, excuse me, begging food, not only for themselves, but for their patients. And of course, they also had a garden, raised chickens. So off some of those basic things, they supplemented their food with.
You know, the sisters started, like you say, in Springfield, but they went all through Central Illinois. They had hospitals and centers all through Central Illinois, but then worldwide too, didn't they?
Eventually, yes, they did. And it's amazing that very first year that we were here, 1875, there were 21 sisters who had gone by 2s and 3s to different places. That first year, they founded 4 different hospitals: St. John's, Effingham, Illinois, Highland, Illinois, and Litchfield. So, I mean, to show that these women
their ability and determination with nothing, starting with nothing. So it's a wonderful, wonderful image. Yeah,
Thank you, sister. Brian, community life. This is probably the essence and definition of community life, because these sisters relied on one another for everything, didn't they? They didn't have families. This was their family.
Correct. You left home and you devoted your life to the service of God and the church and your community. The line says, I put myself at the disposition of my community.
Mm-hmm. And it was, and they had very few choices. Sometimes the choices were made for them, weren't they?
Their superiors saw the gift in each sister, or where a need was. So if they needed a dietitian and they had no other, you were sent off to become a dietitian.
Mm-hmm. And oftentimes you weren't even told in advance where you were going.
Correct. And that's sort of the folklore that has been shared through these years. The sisters would come to this place for prayer, for a retreat time, but the plan was already in place of where you might be reassigned.
And how were they notified?
Well, every morning you had opened this drawer like you did every day, but the last day there's your assignment, which is your obedience. And Sister Josepha, here we have out of the archives, where it says you will be going to, and she opens it up, takes a deep breath, Green Bay, Wisconsin, which was a good place to go. And the sister said, yes, I will go. And in this case, she was being assigned nursing service director. Her personal items that might have been in another location was already on the road to Green Bay without her knowing it, from where she had been for the past maybe months or years.
Yeah, yeah. So it truly is service, and it was selfless service.
Yes.
The order took care of them, but they really had to take care of the public. And in the exchange for that care, they served, and they didn't ask many questions, did they?
They did not. Yeah. And they were at peace, and they were happy.
But they had a lot of opportunities that other women their age might not have had.
They were educated, highly educated, and they had management positions at a time that there weren't women running companies or even managers of departments. And these sisters were running an operation 24 hours a day at a hospital in various capacities, and being at board levels and executive positions.
Yeah. Well, it's been an eye-opener for us. 150 years is really something to celebrate, especially when it's been so important for Illinois and neighboring states. It's been a very important mission.
Yes, extremely.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Mark.
This museum just northwest of Springfield is open by appointment, or you can visit it online at hospitalsisters.org. With another Muddy River Gem brought to you by Dot Foods. I'm Mark McDonald. Thanks for watching.
This episode of Muddy River Gems was brought to you by Dot Foods.